Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with my goals for 2022. I say that very loosely because, as you might can tell from the title of today's video, I'm setting some unique goals, and maybe you might even say I'm not setting goals at all. Looking back on last year, I set a lot of goals that I did not achieve, and I set a lot of goals that I did achieve and that I was really pleased that I was able to stick with. 2021 was a really hard year for me, and normally going into the new year, I feel like a level of hope about the year, or I'm really excited to set new goals, even if I know I'm never going to achieve them. I'm really excited to try to get organized, to start new things. I have not felt that at all this year. We are over a week into the new year when I'm filming this, and normally this is something that I would have done a long time ago, probably back in December, or at least I would have had a very good idea for it. And I just came to the conclusion, since I'm feeling this way about everything and not just reading, that I really want this to be a very relaxed year in terms of goals. I'm not setting myself any sort of reading list of books that I have to read this year. I'm not doing anything that I typically do. I'm not even setting more general goals, except in a couple of cases. In general, the entire goal for 2022 for me is to be lower stress. Everything needs to be low stress. Nothing needs to be something that I am worried about. So the first goal that I have for the new year is actually something that's very contrary to what I think most people on BookTube are trying to say in the new year. My goal is not to read more. My goal is to read less in the new year. In 2021, I read more books than I have ever read in the time that I've been on BookTube, certainly, but probably in the time that I have actually been tracking my reading on Goodreads. I read 120 books, I believe, and I think I felt really great about that during the year. And then at the end of the year, I sat down trying to make my best and my worst lists of the year. And there were a few books that really stood out to me on either end of the spectrum there. And in the end, it was much harder to make those lists for me this year than it has been in years past. And so I've had to come to the conclusion that though I may have read 120 books, probably 80% of those were generally forgettable. And I'm not saying that in a year when I read 40 books or a year when I read 70 books, that 80% of the books are not forgettable. But I do think that the highs and the lows are more memorable to me in a year when I read less. I also want to read less because, as I said, I want this to be a very low stress year. I do not want to put pressure on myself to read. There are other hobbies that I have that when I started this channel, I put by the wayside because I thought if I was not reading 1 or 2 books a week, I was not going to be a successful booktuber. And that is not true. There are plenty of people on BookTube who read 1 book a month, who read 40 books in a year, and they are doing really well. They're making really interesting content. Some of that is me personally. I think I feel like when I'm not reading, I don't have any creative thoughts for the channel, but that then adds a level of stress to reading. Reading should be a hobby, and yet I was getting to the point last year, there were many weekends that I felt like this. I felt like the second that I left work, that I needed to make sure I was going to finish a book in a weekend. And when Sunday afternoon came, Monday afternoon came, whatever, and I hadn't achieved that, I felt like a failure, and that is the most ridiculous thing ever, in my opinion. That is just absolutely ridiculous. And it was because I thought, if I didn't finish a book, once again, am I really gonna have any ideas for videos? And there is something to that. If I'm not reading, I'm really not in the mood to film. But I don't need to rush through everything I'm reading. The numbers, now that I've had high numbers, I know that the numbers do not matter. They really, truly don't. It's what you choose to read, and I think maybe I was more focused on reading a high number last year. It didn't really feel like that to me at the time, but that must have been somewhere in my judgment calls and books that I was picking up. And I think if my goal is to read less, I will be more intentional with the books that I pick up. And I think too, it will also allow me to pick up longer books that I know will take me a longer time to read. So that's really the big goal of the year. Going hand in hand with that is also going to be that I'm not going to try to keep to any particular schedule for the channel in the new year. Going hand in hand with the kind of low stress thing, I was getting really stressed at times when my editing software acted up. And thus I knew I wasn't going to be able to get up a video on a Friday, or I knew I wasn't going to be able to post 2 times a week. And again, that's ridiculous. This is a hobby, and I know for me anyway, that I am the person putting those restrictions and putting those pressures on myself. That is not something anybody on the outside is doing. And I had to have a moment with myself where I said, do I just treat this as a second job? Is this something I feel like I have to do? Yes, that was exactly the conclusion that I came to. In the new year, that's not happening. This is supposed to be fun. When I start to feel a level of pressure or a level of stress, I just don't think that's fun anymore. And I think that is something that you can feel as a viewer, as I have seen it happen on many YouTube channels. When you start feeling like this is your second job, you have to get out content, and thus you don't give the content that you put out your all. And I'm interested in doing that. And so I think if I say to myself, there's no real strict schedule, I'm not going to stress moments when my editing software acts up, or when I wind up having a really busy weekend and thus I didn't film anything, or when I'm just taking a really long time to read a book and so I don't really have much that I want to discuss. I am not going to stress those moments anymore. I'm still going to post regularly because I like that. I would really like to keep Fridays as my upload days. Fridays are days that I really like to watch videos. It's just really nice to kind of go into the weekend. And so I think I will try to keep up videos on Fridays, but it may mean that it's just 1 video a week. Sometimes it might mean a video every other week. I'm just gonna try to be very low stress about it. Another reason that I also wanna go into this low stress, read less kind of mode is that I have other hobbies that I would like to pay more attention to, that I have essentially left by the wayside as years have gone on, particularly on BookTube. This is really inspired by Rainy from Rainy Day Reads. I'll link to her channel down below, but she does like a lot of needlepoint, a lot of cross stitch, and she has talked about before kind of balancing her crafting hobbies with reading, balancing her channel, and now her channel has kind of morphed into half reading, half crafting, which I really love for her. And it's just really inspired me to say there were things that I really liked doing that I would still like to do and that I think would be very good for me. And so I'm going to make a concerted effort this year to make sure that reading is not the only hobby I have. And so that kind of goes hand in hand with reading less, stressing less about a video schedule. One of my big successes last year, one of the goals that I set for myself that I'm really proud that I do believe I achieved, this was the big success of the year in my opinion, was that I wanted to reread more. Rereading made up the bulk of my reading life when I was younger. And I know that that's probably the case for a lot of people. And it just felt like when you moved into BookTube in particular, it felt like, why should I reread something? Why should I discuss something that I've probably already talked about before? But I always love to see other people reread because I do think you come into a book with different expectations at different times in your life. And so I made a concerted effort last year to reread more, and I think I reread 16 books, and that's amazing to me. So that is something I would really like to carry over into the new year. It was something that I just really enjoyed doing. And in particular, I want to make sure that I am rereading favorite books. And so I did that last year with Interview with the Vampire, and that was amazing. It was so much fun to reread a book that I've always considered a favorite. And so I think that that is something that I would like to continue in 2022. Something else that I want to do that is still a loose goal, but is something that I think I'm going to track. I think I'm going to track this in my reading journal. I really would like to finish series. I am somebody who is very guilty of starting a series and then going no further with it. Some of this is that I like to keep up with new releases, and so I know I'll read the first book in a series when it comes out and when nothing else is out, and then I just don't carry on with the series. And in other cases, it's just that the series is really long. And I am not somebody who really likes to binge read series. I used to, but it's just not something that I enjoy anymore. I really don't like spending so much time with the same characters over and over again. I kind of feel as though now with series, I need a break in between books. The key for me will be making sure that I come back to that series and pick up the next book. And I've started out my new year doing this. I am continuing the Dublin Murder Squad series, and I'm going to finish that out. That is going to be one of my goals here at the very beginning of the year, is I want to go on and achieve something early and finish that series. And there are several series and trilogies on my list that I know I only have one book left in. And so those are going to be series that I try to prioritize. So this is just going to be me going through the series that I kind of have on the go, so to speak. And I'm going to make decisions about the ones that I'm going to carry on with and the ones that I'm going to DNF. There are definitely going to be some DNFs throughout the year, and that's fine. I'm very free with my DNFing. That's something else that I really want to say and really would like to be a goal for myself, is I just want to be freer with DNFing. And I want to be honest with myself, because I often say I'm not in the mood for a book when I put it down. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes I know, will I ever be in the mood for this book? And I think it's a pretty strong no. And so I'm just going to have to be really open with myself and say, do you just not want to read this? Is this just not good? And I'm going to allow myself to DNF more freely. I think that's probably the best way to go. And that's something that I also used to be pretty good at prior to BookTube in my younger life. I'd know in the first 5 pages of a book that I wasn't feeling it and that I was never going to try it again. And I think that's probably where I need to get back to. Maybe not the first 10 pages, but I do need to be more honest with myself when I'm just not feeling a book. Another of my goals last year was no hauling. Did I achieve that? No. And this year, I'm really not even going to put that on myself. You know, I think sometimes when we say we're going on a no haul, it sounds like you're really punishing yourself, that you've done the wrong thing. I don't like the language around that, first of all, because I know a lot of people have used books, you know, and even book buying itself as a coping mechanism over the past couple of years. And I know that's how I got in the situation that I am in, is that I'm somebody who unhauls pretty frequently. And so books normally have a pretty high turnover rate in my house. And when this all started and everything was shut down, I didn't unhaul at all. And so books came in, but books never left. And it, of course, became a thing to say, I've had a really hard day, I'm going to buy a book. And then it also became, I had a really great day. Don't I deserve to buy a book? And that's something I'm stopping, but it is not something that I am going to feel guilty about. Well, we got interrupted because the leaf men came by, the people who suck up leaves off the street, and I think they're still out there. So I apologize if you can hear that. So I don't really know where I was, but essentially I am going on a no-buy for I don't know how long, but I am going to be technically buying things on my no-buy. They're just going to be pre-orders, as is always the case every year. My goal with the no-buy or with the no-haul, anything like that, is essentially that I don't want to do anything in excess. I don't want to be bringing in 30 books at a time, but at the same time, if I buy a book or a couple of books here and there, it's not going to be something that I get hung up on or that I feel guilty about. I've said before that really my issue is more with space than it is with spending, if that makes any sense, because I tend to be somebody who frequents used bookstores, library book sales, and I often have credit at my local used bookstore, and so often I didn't spend any money. And that's what gets in my head, is that I think, well, it's not that bad because I didn't spend full price on anything, or even I just didn't pay anything at all. But my issue is more just space. I don't really have space at all. I don't have many bookshelves. And so that's what always has to be the little voice in the back of my head, is where am I going to put things and how are they going to be organized? But in terms of money, in terms of spending, something I'm also going to do this year is I am going to track my AdSense payments, you know, per month, every other month, however often it is that I get something from them. And I'm going to compare that to the money that I spend on books. My goal with AdSense has always been that it would essentially pay for the channel. And basically by that I mean, last year, for example, my tripod broke, so I needed a new tripod. I kind of looked at it as AdSense bought that for me, or AdSense has bought essentially the books that I bring in, or books that people have specifically recommended to me or have said they would like to see a review on. And so that's always been my goal with AdSense. And this year I really want to track it and see if AdSense really does cover my book buying habit, and if it really does essentially pay for the channel. And I personally think that it does, and I'm not somebody who buys books every month. So I'm going to be interested to see how this goes, because I also don't get AdSense every month. So this is something that I just want to do, is I just really want to track and see how the spending is going. And if AdSense is not covering it, then I need to cut down my book buying. But of course, going on a no buy, hopefully this won't really be an issue for me. Now, I said I wasn't setting myself any specific goals with book lists, a list of books that I have to read this year, but I am doing a couple of projects that I am going to try to keep very, very low key. The first of these is that I am joining in with Faith from Faith in Books' read along of City of God by St. Augustine. And I am not really involved in the read along officially at all, because I think they have, you know, a Voxer group or an Instagram group or something like that. I'm not a part of that because I'm already behind, and I know I'm going to be going slower than everybody else, and I'm really going to have to take a lot of notes on this. But this is a book that is big on my bookish bucket list, and I was really excited to see that Faith was going to be doing something with it and hopefully making videos on it. I'll link to her channel down below. And so I'm excited about this. I know it's going to be daunting, and going hand in hand with that, I think I'm going to try Ulysses this year, because last year I did a tag about my bookish bucket list, and everyone was supposed to vote on the book that you should read from this list within a certain time period. And I said by the end of 2022, and Ulysses by James Joyce won. So I really probably ought to get started on that sooner rather than later. My two big projects for the year kind of go hand in hand with my Napoleon project from last year. So last year I themed all of my reading around Napoleon, nonfiction, classics, anything in between. I tried to theme around Napoleon. And this year my intent was to theme the year around Percy Shelley. And I think I still will. It's just not going to be as formal a project as that Napoleon project was. I would gladly do a video all about that, but I'm definitely going to be reading his work. I'm going to be reading works that were his favorites, and then I'm also going to be reading nonfiction, and actually a couple of historical fiction books that involve Percy Shelley. I'm really excited about that, but I didn't want it to be as formal as my Napoleon project wound up being. But I'm still thinking that I might do a video about everything on my TBR for that. I also wanted to make this a year of reading Anne Rice, because she passed away towards the very end of 2021, and I've always considered her to be my favorite author. When I reread Interview with the Vampire last year, I realized that I probably would enjoy everything else by her that I've always loved. I've always been scared to reread her. I've always felt like she's an author that would fall quite a bit for me on a reread. And I don't necessarily think that's true now that I've reread Interview, and it was such a wonderful experience. And after she passed away, I just decided that I really wanted 2022 to be a year of rereading her and possibly reading books that I have never read by her. So I want to reread things like The Witching Hour. The Witching Hour is, I think, objectively her best book. That's my opinion anyway. It's one of my favorites. It's my second favorite after Interview. My third favorite book of hers is something called Violin, which is a bit of a ghost story, and it's really, really romantic and gothic, of course, because it is Anne Rice. And then I also would love to reread The Mummy. I love her Mummy book. That's one of my sentimental faves. So those are at the top of my list. But in general, I would like to reread basically the entire Vampire Chronicles series. Somewhere in there, I dropped off and I never finished that series, which I've always thought was probably a very good decision. But I'm gonna try. I won't say that I'm gonna read everything that she ever wrote, but I would like to read some of the books of hers that I never gave a chance to. And then I would also just love to reread the works of hers that have always been my favorites. So those are actually all of my 2022 goals. So for the most part, I'm just gonna try to keep things really laid back and really, really simple. I hope that 2022 is going to be a lower stress year than last year was for me, and I think these goals will help me keep it that way. I would love to know down below if you have set any specific reading goals for 2022, but that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.